Welcome back to another episode of Plugged In and Pissed Off. My name is Giselle. I am from Democracy, North Carolina, and today we have an incredible guest who's joining us, Hannah Preston, a North Carolina-based social media influencer who built an unexpected platform by advocating for accessible healthcare and public health reform. Today, we'll explore how grassroots digital organizing can drive real policy change and how the intersection of something like health equity and voter freedoms connect. We'll also talk about what it takes to sustain civic engagement beyond the traditional election cycle. Hey, Hannah, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, for sure. We're so happy you're here. Democracy North Carolina, we have an online presence and we've been following local organizers and advocates across all of our platforms. And we ran into your account, Health Policy Princess. And we're like, man, this person is doing really awesome things. And I'd love to hear kind of the backstory about how you kind of got online and decided to use your voice to make change. And then how that kind of grew into what we're seeing today. So, if you want to give our listeners a little background about yourself and about Health Policy Princess.
Yes, absolutely. As you said, my name's Hannah Preston. I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland, but I've been in North Carolina for, I guess, around 8 years now. So, I went to undergrad at Guilford College, go fighting Quakers, and then I went to UNC Chapel Hill for a master's in health policy. So, my educational background is solely in political science and public health. Health Policy Princess really came about as I was applying to a public health master's program in the thick of the pandemic. There was not a lot of transparency around what it looked like to apply to graduate programs, specifically in the public health field. And it really annoyed me. And I thought it was, really kind of slimy in the way that that happens because applying to any school, let alone a secondary school, is really expensive. And there's a
Yes.
lot to consider. And, costs kind of rack up. And as someone who was 21, had never worked a full-time job before, graduated in the pandemic, I thought, I can't be the only one that's feeling this way. So if I can post online and walk through what my experience was like, so I can make the next public health professional's life a little bit easier, I'm going to do that. So Health Policy Princess has kind of shifted as my career has shifted. So it started as this really educational based platform. So it showed pretty much my time from when I got into Carolina, from when I graduated, and then shifted to what it looked like to be an early career individual living in North Carolina. I was working for a nonprofit lobbying for Medicaid for children and families. I'd worked for the Department of Health and Human Services for a little bit of time. And now I'm with Influence NC. So it's kind of shifted in that way, but to me, this is public health work. In Public Health 101, you learn how to effectively message so that people can make educated and informed decisions. And so social media has been the kind of new platform for that. Instead of talking about messages on public transportation, it's how do I advocate and talk about a really complex topic online?
Yeah, no, that's great. She has a resume. She has a master's. She's worked at nonprofits. That's incredible. And to know that you were working on your master's in public health policy during a public health crisis. You were doing the work that we all need. And I know public health itself has been under attack by this current administration. And it just goes to show how important people that are studying public health and other masters of social work and all of these other sectors, how important it is to our communities and kind of keeping, like you said, that information cycle open and honest and transparent. I think the pandemic did a little something to us about trust with public health
Yes.
too. How does health justice and advocating for public health kind of intersect with democracy?
Yeah, I mean, in my eyes, you cannot have one without the other. So, policy is how public health gets across the finish line. We talk about most public health programs. I feel like, as we've seen the headlines recently, without government funding, public health cannot operate. Without access to baseline things like a safe and walkable home, a walkable neighborhood, access to clean foods that are all determined by local government, state government, and your federal governments. So they're really intertwined. And again, you cannot have one without the other. And I think we're seeing now what happens when democracy is turned on its head. Health is going to decline. I think we have the first measles outbreak in Wake County from what I saw this
Yeah.
morning. Um,
Eradicated,
yeah,
in the early aughts, and here we are not that far after that.
Yes, and what I will say is, it feels kind of silly to talk about now, but politics and public health used to be two really unsexy career fields. And so when they were working well, both fields were boring. And they should be because they're the behind the scenes maneuvers of our day to day lives. We're seeing what happens when it's flashy and there's people in office that maybe aren't there for that civic engagement reason. And so it's been really interesting to navigate right now in those times. But I mean, truly, political determinants of health and social determinants of health are identical. So I think they have to work together, and we see what happens when they don't.
Yeah, and, tell me a little bit more about, like, when you were in school and you were recognizing that you had something to say, like, were you working with other students? Was there type some sort of fellowship among, like, really the cohort of folks that went to college, started college, and graduated college in the pandemic? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and now how you kind of reflect back on that time now.
Oh gosh, yes, it's a great question. It's so hard to think about when it comes to how we operated as students because I think when you learn something in school, you think you get a couple of years to process it before you fully need it. But we were learning, you know, public health 101, theology, political science, ideology, and then at the same time going into a global pandemic where I was in Guilford County. So they were figuring out what the mask mandate looked like. I was also a student athlete. So were student athletes allowed to actually play sports during this pandemic? And I was in a small liberal arts school where public health was not the number one department. And so money was limited, and politics plays a role in what outreach looked like. We were a sports campus, so that took priority, which was really interesting as a public health person. And I ended up actually quitting my lacrosse team because we were still allowed to play across state lines. I just didn't want to put myself at risk at the time. But it was really interesting because activism, organizing, social justice, and public health, their pillars are the same. And so when we talked about that, it was really seeing in real time. It was 2020. So we had a lot of marches and movements going on around George Floyd. And so we were talking about racial injustices at the same time as a pandemic, and holding so many things at the same time as a student in the South was really interesting. Um, it's been interesting to see being in a small liberal arts school versus a larger university too. Those conversations shift. I will say the conversations I had at Guilford, I would say, were more fruitful than the ones I had at UNC when it comes to actually talking about public health and social justice in the workplace. There's things that I reflect on every day from what I've learned at Guilford, which is not what I thought and expected, reflecting on my 2 degrees, but I feel very grateful to have the lived experience at the same time to set me up for where I am today.
I mean, obviously, you were saying something that resonated with a lot of folks because I assume your following grew organically. So, what are one or two things that really stuck out for you in the past few years that you've been hosting Health Policy Princess that kind of resonated with the community?
Yeah, I will say my first video that really took off, I'd been at the General Assembly because normally I cover every day that the General Assembly is in session. And there were a couple of bills that fundamentally I just was not agreeing with. Those are, instead of an 8 hour long workday, those are 12-hour, 14-hour, 15
Oh
hour
yeah.
long workdays.
They love
They're
to like put a
long.
bill up and then they vote on it and then it's rushed through midnight and then it's the next day like yes.
Yes, and so I was, like, irritated. You can see the video where it's like I'm sweaty, my, like, hair is disheveled, and
Yes,
I
you
just
were
had
pissed
a
off.
Yes, and I was like, "Welcome to North Carolina, you will not believe what happened today." And it was something I didn't even think about. I was just like, "I'm so tired. I need people to hear what's going on because I cannot be the only one who experienced this." And this was a conversations around the death penalty in North Carolina.
Mm, yeah,
The conversations, it felt like, 1950. It was,
yeah,
"Can we lynch people?" It was
yeah,
these conversations that was like,
it was
what planet
disgusting.
am I living on as a human, but also as a public health professional? There was, so much getting thrown around. And unfortunately, that was the topic that really grew. And so I think from there, people have tuned in because I've tried to make these topics about what's going on so bite sized. And so that's been interesting to see what's worked for people, what topic areas have been important for folks to want to learn more about. And we've also kind of bridged this weird journalism gap. I will be the first to say I'm not a journalist. I'm a public health professional who likes to talk a lot. But we're in a lot of spaces where I think smaller, you know, journalists and news normally are, but because so much of news and journalism is going away, we're
Yeah.
starting to fill that gap. And so it's been
Yeah.
interesting to navigate that dynamic at the same time, especially being in the South with a General Assembly that is very set in their ways and very dated.
Yes, I mean, the saying of "How goes the South, how goes the nation," and that is so
Yes.
true here in North Carolina. We love to be the poster child for everything bad, ranking lowest in public education, lowest in teacher pay,
Oh
lowest in,
my God.
we have an F in gerrymandering, like, we get Fs across the board, and I'm not proud of that. I'm a proud North
No.
Carolinian, but not proud of that.
It's not a great look. No, not at all.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the bill that you were referring to was House Bill 307. Was that the crime
Yes,
bill? Yeah,
that is the one.
that was pretty awful too. I was at the Senate, and the GA that day too, and the couple days that that was rammed through,
Yeah,
and to hear our lawmakers use really racist and vulgar language really stemmed in this era. North Carolina also has a diverse history from amazing, incredible Black culture and Black
yeah,
history, in Durham and Charlotte and Wilmington and Greensboro and A&T. And we also have a horrid past that comes with that too. And I
yes,
think when I think about that speech that was on the floor for House Bill 307 and the lawmakers and the way that it was passed through, like there really is this culture battle that, we're seeing happen across the nation. I don't know, what is it, like 187 million people tuned into Bad Bunny, and then it was like 4 million for an
yes.
alternative showing. So
Yeah,
there are culture wars happening, but North Carolina really is in the heart and the center of that. So with that comes misinformation and deep fakes and AI and so much more that's to come. I mean, the White House putting out AI generated racist memes and then calling it a meme, but it's a deep fake. I mean,
horrible.
what do you think what are you doing, with your platform that you have, and what do you think folks can do to cut through that information?
Absolutely.
Misinformation.
Yeah, no, and I think that was a day at the General Assembly that I think will always stick with me. It's gutting for a lot of reasons, because I think we're at a time where before pre-2020, people were not as openly racist as they are now, and it will always be jarring to me when not only community members are openly racist, but elected officials within our state legislature. I think there's a threshold for things that should not be allowed. That should be an obvious one. To me, that feels like an unsaid rule. And
Decorum, as they say.
yeah, absolutely. It makes me also think about how we talk about mental health. Referring to a person going through a mental health crisis as a monster is horrific.
No, yeah,
Um, Also, saying that this was basically a race versus race conversation is horrible because every single person that spoke negatively about that individual has a diverse district that they serve.
sure.
And so I think that sent a message to everyone that lives in their district
Yeah,
of um, who they hold to be worthy of a conversation and who not to. And so um, part of that for me is being able to have uncomfortable conversations with people.
yeah,
It also means putting myself in rooms that I personally would not wanna be in, and that means having the tough conversations with some of those legislators or folks that mimic that same rhetoric, because
sure.
clearly I'm a white girl, and so I think there's a level of conversation of like, "Hey, I think there's a way to phrase things," and I think being in the South, there are some rooms where they are predominantly white, and so how do you speak up in those conversations to say, "Hey, what you just said was actually really racist and not okay?" And in terms of my platform, I'm not the right messenger for everything. because of lived experience that I do not have and will never have. And so also knowing how to use my platform to uplifting other people that have that lived experience and that are also creators. And so I will say one of the good things that Instagram has done is allowed that collaboration tool because there
Yeah.
are other great creators who are doing such great work who will deliver a message lived experience that I can't. And so that's been a really fun way to be able to do that. And I think it goes back to public health. The idea of I don't have to understand or be a part of everyone's lived experience, but that doesn't mean it's not important. So being
Yeah.
able to actively listen and to hear from folks, and I think that's where public health and policy can be used for such great things. You know, we've seen cities that have gone out in communities and said, what do you need from a local government? What do you need from a city council or a county commission? And there are elected people, maybe not in the General Assembly here, or at least not the ones in power, who will say, okay, we can make policy out of that. We hear you, we hear your needs, and we can make some change there. So, really using my platform and any room I'm in to really be this connector because there's so many great organizations and so many great voices that are doing work in the state. So if I can, bridge people together that are doing similar work or be able to articulate things in a certain way or take those lived experiences and talk about that with legislators. One of the things has also been us, being able to have tough conversations and having elected officials able to see Influence NC as a resource. So one of the things that Influence NC offers, we are a nonpartisan organization, but we offer social media trainings for every and all elected officials in the state. Um, because social media is the path that we are taking, and we're seeing elected officials use it. And also, we're in the South. So there are some seasoned elected officials who barely use their phone, let alone Instagram. And so we wanted to create this dynamic of I'm sure you have questions. I'm sure using social media is really overwhelming. Let me help you to be more accessible to your constituents. And so it's allowed this level of trust and respect with some constituent or with some elected officials that I probably wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, you make a really great point about having to speak up and use either your privilege, your resources, being able to connect people in conversation about hard and tough topics. And that's something we really do, I think, should focus on as a society and as Southerners and North Carolinians, having those crucial conversations. I'm Latina, and the Latin vote has gone many, many ways, and we know that the Latin community is under attack. There are real threats of violence and abduction that are coming from our federal government. And
Yeah.
we want to make sure that we can protect our people and all people of North Carolina and that they are able to exercise their constitutional freedoms, which includes
Yes.
voting safely and security. Intimidation is still under the Voting Rights Act a federal crime.
Yeah.
And so like I really yeah, I just really like how you said that, like especially you you are saying you're having conversations with people maybe across the aisle that you normally haven't had those conversations with. I encourage our folks to also do that at the dinner table. You have Mother's Day, you have Father's
Yes.
Day, you have all of Easter, all of these holidays coming up where you can have conversations with, your uncle or your grandfather or whomever that might also have a skewed view of what's happening either here in North Carolina, nationally, in Greensboro, in Guilford County, in Mecklenburg, etc. And it's
Yes.
gonna, to the point of like people don't trust the news. People don't have a lot of trust for a lot of things, rightly so.
Yeah.
We always say at Democracy CNC, like the number one person you can trust is your friend, the person you're there with. Like you're gonna trust that person more than a random person on the street or at the GA or on television. And so, how do you balance like being authentic and having like that responsibility and having these hard conversations about it with also respecting that you might never agree. Maybe like walk us through a scenario that you've had with a lawmaker or somebody who might have had an opposing opinion and you've been able to kind of either come to an agreement or not.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I would start with a little bit of advice to anyone that's going to consume media of any kind, especially around politics, specifically around health as well, is to never agree blindly enough to where you stop thinking critically. because I think we see it a lot with party lines. Whoever is running for that office as a Republican or as a Democrat, sometimes we just blindly choose and say, great, this is who I'm voting for. This is my party lines. And I think we have to be a little bit more critical in the way we think about that. Because, I think it's great that I have the following that I have. I love it and I feel so grateful for it. And also, I think you have to make sure you can differentiate what are you seeing that's fact? What are you seeing that's more emotionally fueled? Because, yes, while I am a public health professional and while I love talking online, I think your words really matter. And I think the way that I talk about things is very specific. The timing in which I talk about things is very specific because I'm trying to inform people. I'm not trying to get, the biggest reactions. Because I think genuinely someone that's in public health, that's in any kind of organizing or activism or policy, it's a very emotionally intense
Sure.
role to have.
Yeah.
And so if you don't find what your true values are and what you're willing to die for, I don't know if doing this work is the right thing for you. And being this like wearing an activism hat is heavy and it's emotionally taxing. And um I'm glad that the timing for me has worked out in the way that it has, because it's where I know what I firmly believe in. I know what I'm willing to compromise on. And that's allowed me to enter conversations with a lot more compassion and joy than I probably ever would have. Because during COVID, I was pissed. Said,
Yeah.
I'm living in the South, there's all these things going on. No one trusts public health anymore because of COVID. And I got, 50% in this state and this country that wants to vote for a specific president that doesn't even think I should have human rights. Now, I've really leaned into the joy of it all because if I don't, one, I think I'll get burnt out, and I could not imagine doing a job that's outside of public health and outside of policy. And it's allowed me to also have a middle ground. With Influence NC, we say we're pro democracy and we're pro North Carolina. And that looks different living in Wake County
Yeah.
versus Harnett County versus
Yeah.
Swain County. And you've got to know how to adapt and meet people where they are with those lived experiences. And so I've had a lot of really raw conversations with folks that have voted for Donald Trump both times. And we've said, hey, you're a military family. What is Medicaid looking like for you? How are you able to get a lot of the resources that you need? And they'll say, hey, I'm having some troubles with this. I'm having some troubles with that. I think you have to build trust. And I think a lot of it is ignorance. I think you also mentioned it earlier. We have one of the lowest educational fundings across the country,
We are ranked 50th and 49th. It's awful.
which makes sense that we're seeing a really low literacy rate. We're
Yeah, and
seeing,
Leandro, right? Leandro got punted again last week.
yes, yeah. And that's been going on for what, over a decade? So now
Yeah,
a lot of the people that were affected by Leandro are now in the workforce. And
yeah.
now we're wondering why people are
And,
so
like, the
ignorant.
lawmaker who's still pushing for it was a child when Leandro
It's
was. Yeah,
crazy to me. And
fucking
so
crazy.
I've lived in very liberal parts of this state. That is not the case for everybody. Some people are in seas of red. And I think I've had the experience to go and travel to some of these different counties that I never thought I would go to and talk with folks that live there and have lived there their entire lives. And we have these really raw conversations of what is the most expensive thing that you're paying for in your day to day? And they'll say healthcare or rent or whatever it is. And I talk through, okay, well, here's the autonomy that you have to make some choices in your city council, your county commission, up to who's going in Congress. And so it allows people to have some hope to say, I have control over this. And this is why voting is important.
Yeah,
And my biggest thing is I want to get people to the polls. What you do when you're there is none of my business, but I
yep,
want you to feel comfortable and
yes,
informed because that's the public health in me. I'm here to make sure that you can make informed decisions about every step of your life.
yeah,
And the joy part is also who is going to want to show up to anything where you're getting yelled at the whole time?
yeah,
You know, who is going to want to have a conversation where you're coming in screaming and shouting and yelling at people? It doesn't open the conversation to be
no,
honest and maybe change people's minds. And as someone who has developed an autoimmune disorder in the last 2 years, I also can't do it physically.
yeah,
So you have to lean into the positive side because I think joyful resistance will be the best way to combat so much of this.
Yeah, I mean, hope, joy, rest. Rest also is
Yes.
resistance. Yeah, I mean, we are a purple state through and through. We've been a purple state.
Yeah.
If you look at the 2024 election, and you look at the 2020 election, where many, many, many voters voted for Trump and then voted for Roy Cooper. It was
Yeah.
a huge split amongst that was like one of the most popular splits of votes here in North Carolina. And then
Yeah.
also independent voters have risen to become the largest group of voters here in North Carolina as well. So you have a lot of
Absolutely.
kind of like you mentioned since 2020 and the pandemic and kind of how the Overton window, as they say, the political mindset has shifted to a more extreme standpoint. There are people questioning the choices or those party lines that you mentioned, and local races. I feel like, at least for me, and I'm not going to age myself here, but I'm a millennial, a little bit older, and so like I remember when Obama came into office, and I remember like the response and reaction to that. We saw that happen at the Supreme Court with Citizens United in 2013, and then here in North Carolina, 2013, there was the massive anti-voter bill, and then the racial and partisan gerrymandering that made it to court in 2018. So really, the 2010s was kind of building up to what we are now. It's like they like to say the F around and find out, like we're finding
Yeah.
out right now. And I really love how you really name and lead with hope and joy and encouragement, because that is what opposing forces want to diminish. And like, that's not going to happen. Like, we have a reason to be joyous. We have a reason to like be with our people, to go to the polls, to use our vote as our voice, and make sure those local decisions like matter. City council person, county commissioner, like they're making decisions on like police funding in your county and county, whether sheriffs
Yes.
respond to ICE, whether they protect the people from potential federal intervention and state sanctioned violence, whether your school has funding or a nurse there, or it's one nurse for the whole county that's going to
Yeah.
every single school. Like, those are such important decisions that are being made. And so, like, we just
Yeah.
really want to encourage people. I know you're doing that too, to just like get out and vote. If you have any issues with voting, Democracy North Carolina, we help oversee the election protection hotline, the voter assistance hotline. It's a nonpartisan hotline, 888 our vote. That's 888-687-8683. You can give them a call and you'll be connected with an election expert that can help answer any question that you have. Or if you're at the polls, you're being turned away, maybe you're seeing some intimidating behavior, maybe you're seeing ICE at the polls, call the hotline. It's available in many, many languages. We also have a dedicated intimidation expert and kind of routing calling center that kind of picks up those phone calls too. So we want everybody to feel comfortable and hopeful and joyful as they head to the polls this year, because it really, really matters. One of the other things that you mentioned was like burnout. Like, that is so real. And I've been at our organization for many years now, and there's some days where I'm just like flip table, like house five style, and just like kind of be over it. Like, what are some of the things that you do to bring joy for yourself and for this work? Like, I mean, Bad Bunny's The Bonito Bowl was like
Oh
at the
my
top
god.
of my week.
Oh my gosh. Yeah,
Yes,
I
but
mean,
yeah,
I think you have to find joy in a lot of it, and I think you also have to be really disciplined about setting aside time to have joy and have fun. I'm 26. I live in Raleigh. Like, I am in this time of my life where it's like I still want to be able to like go to the bars and go out and get a cute drink with friends and
yes,
spend time with my boyfriend. And being in politics, it feels like there's not a 5 o'clock work's done. It is constant.
yeah.
And I would say to remind folks, you don't have to go to every event. I don't encourage you to go to every event, but pick the ones that you do and then really take the time for yourself because it is an emotionally and physically draining field of work. We are getting so much information at one time about politics that is now constantly taking in information in such a fast-paced way because of social media right now. And so
Yeah.
much of the news cycle is negative. And so I think also having
And that's also
boundaries
like one
there.
of the steps towards authoritarianism is to like blast people with really bad news over and over. So it's also part of like the white supremacist propaganda wheel.
Yeah. And so I think also being like, if I'm someone who's having to be in this world, what is my on and off switch? I'm also someone that really just needs to move my body. So I'm at a bar or Pilates class every single day, pretty much, because I feel like it just helps really cleanse the day with so much. Yeah. So I would say I've really made it a point to take trips, go hang out with friends that I haven't seen, really building my community outside of this political bubble because it can feel all consuming. And as soon as it feels that way, I think you're on the path to burnout, if not already there, and you just don't know it yet.
Yeah, yeah, that's the moment where you're like, "Hold on, I'm turning my phone on D&D and I'm watching the
Yeah.
trackiest show." I'm like
Yes. I'm a
post-pandemic,
Bravo girl.
I'm a
Like,
Bravo girly too, and pre-2020, I was not. I will say I might have been, like, a little pretentious, been like, "That's not for me," but now I'm like, Below Deck,
yes.
Vanderpump, like, every
Yes.
Housewives, they give it all to me, and, it's because we deserve those moments to ourselves, to just tune out,
Yes.
to not doom scroll till 3 o'clock in the morning.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't even sleep with my phone in my bed, like in my room. It is in another
Oh,
part
that's a
of
good
my.
one.
'Cause I can't. I will look at it all the time, and then I won't sleep, or I'll have nightmares about what's going on and then realize I haven't actually gone to sleep, that is the world we're living in. So, like, you just have to, and, like, that's hard to do because the point of politics is to make it feel like you have to be commenting on something all the time, and you
Yeah,
don't.
yeah,
Because I would say sometimes the most effective people are doing the work behind the scenes. It's not always the loudest person in the room.
yes,
So really think strategically about what is your long-term goal? Is it to run for office? Is it to lobby? Is it to do all these different things? Because the voice and the persona that you are putting out there has to look different. Not everyone has to wear the same hat. Somebody just has to do something. There's something for everybody. And so if you want to be the educator, great, do that. If you want to be the agitator, great. And also know that those can shift. And so I think you've seen my platform shift. It used to be this, loud and proud, about the Democratic Party. And now it's shifted to educate of because that's where the gap was. I want to talk to you about what's going on because there's a lot of things going on. And for me, as a creator, everyone is commenting about what's going on in DC. To me, that's not helpful because you don't need 1,000 takes on the same thing. We all know it's not great
yeah,
versus there's so many important things happening in North Carolina that are not getting the coverage that
yeah,
are affecting you 10
yeah,
times over.
yeah.
I mean, I went to a Raleigh City Council meeting and they were talking about housing. And it was talking about putting affordable housing in apartments up in a part of Raleigh. I'm a renter. I will be a renter for a long time because the average homeowner is now 54, which means I got 30 more years to go.
Wild.
And the conversation was a lot of retired folks who have been homeowners for decades. And the biggest concern for them, kid you not, was said to me that they don't want a shadow in their garden. I would do a lot of things for a garden. I couldn't even
Yeah,
think about a garden right now. And it just shows like that's what your city council is determining as one of the
yeah,
fastest growing cities in the country.
yeah,
We don't have enough
absolutely.
housing for people.
Nope.
But
Yeah,
now the conversation is the folks that are in the room, the constituents they're hearing from, don't want the shadow, and that's who they're communicating with, versus
yeah,
if young people are in the room and saying, "Hey, here's what I can afford as, a post-grad living in Raleigh," the conversation shifts for not only people that live there in the community, but for the city council members as well.
mm. Yeah, I mean, Raleigh specifically is a multiracial,
Yeah.
multi-generational, community. You have Shaw University, you have St. Aug, you have Peace, you have Meredith, you have NC State. Like, there are so many
Yeah.
college campuses just in Raleigh, not just the Triangle, but just in
Yes.
Raleigh. And yeah, the NIMBYs, I remember when they came
Yes.
out super hard when the AUD discussion was happening, and also what happened to Heritage Park and downtown
Yeah.
in South Street with the Red Hat Amphitheater and the expansion of
Yeah.
that. Like, there's been so many conversations about, like you said, like housing and the way accessibility and bus lines and like walking. Those decisions are being made at the city council level, and if like we
Yeah.
don't show up, our voices aren't heard and those meetings still happen and votes are still had. And so,
Yes.
yeah, getting out there and getting to your city council meeting and making it accessible too. I think, Raleigh City Council, they have WebEx, and the State Board of Elections, they have WebEx.
Mhm.
Some of the committee hearings at the state legislature are live streamed. Every floor vote is live streamed for the House and the Senate. And so there are ways to engage without physically being in Raleigh too, because North Carolina is like 8 hours long sideways,
Yes.
So we're not expecting you to come down to Raleigh, but we are
No.
hoping, that you do attend your city council meeting or maybe one of your school board meetings. School boards are another really critical decision maker in your community. And if there's just one thing you're gonna do, like, just go vote. That one, I
Yes.
hope, is an easy one for
Yes.
folks.
And I would say
Um,
take some time to see who's on your ballot, because
yes,
for some reason, and it happens to me every single time that I vote, I get this, like, anxiety, and I feel like it's the former testing anxiety in me where I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I have to have all these answers and all these things," where it's like, "No, this is a privilege and a joy to be able to vote, to be able to have this right." And so you have the time and the accessibility to look at who's on your ballot and take all the notes that you need in there with you. That's always what I tell people is like, you can have a
yes,
cheat sheet. You can
yes,
take the sample ballot, write it all up, and bring
100%.
it in. And if anyone tells you otherwise, you call that hotline because, you
Yes.
want to feel informed and you want to feel confident going into the polls. And so take the time to do the due diligence if you can.
Yeah, and, Democracy North Carolina, we have an amazing digital voter guide. You can go to ncvoter.branch.vote anywhere in North Carolina, enter in your address, and it's going to bring up all your individual sample ballot candidates and backgrounds on those candidates and information about what those positions do, what maybe a soil and water manager is, et cetera, et cetera. So go to ncvoter.branch.vote, and you'll be able to pull up your sample ballot, see who's on there, and what those positions are about. Any final thoughts for our listeners today, Hannah?
Oh, let me think. I would just say get out and vote. And if you have questions about voting, there are a lot of resources out there. Democracy NC is such a great one. And bring a friend with you. Early voting falls on Valentine's Day this year. So if you and
Yes.
your boo want to go vote, or you and a friend, make it fun, make it a date. And yeah, make sure to go vote not only on March 3rd, but also in November as well.
Yes, absolutely. I like make it fun, reward yourself, like get an ice cream afterwards, get a margarita
Yes.
afterwards, go get your nails done, like make it a treat because it is, it isn't sexy, like you said, but you can make it sexy. You can have a meet cute
Yes.
at the polling place.
Absolutely. One other thing I did want to plug is we are starting a new interview series called Lunch Break with Influence NC. So, twice a month, we will be eating cookout with some of your favorite elected officials across the state to learn a little bit more about them and the roles that they have across the state. So, make sure to tune in at Influence NC and you can see who maybe we'll interview.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Hannah, for joining us today. We're so grateful for your time and for the dedication that you're giving your followers and your community and the information that you're putting out there about everything that's happening in North Carolina. Be sure to like and subscribe to Democracy North Carolina. Subscribe to Health Policy Princess and Influence and See. And make sure you bring a friend, you head to the polls. If you have any issues, call or text 888-R-VOTE. And we'll see you on March 3rd. Bye.
Bye.